A teacher asked her 6th grade class how many of them were Obama fans. Not really knowing what an Obama fan is, but wanting to be liked by the teacher, all the kids raised their hands except for little Johnny. The teacher asked little Johnny why he has decided to be different. Little Johnny said, "Because I'm not an Obama fan." The teacher asked, "Why aren't you an Obama fan?" Johnny said, "Because I'm a Republican." The teacher asked him why he's a Republican. Little Johnny answered, "Well, my mom's a Republican and my dad's a Republican, so I'm a Republican." Annoyed by this answer, the teacher asked, "If your mom was a moron and your dad was an idiot, what would that make you?" With a big smile, little Johnny replied, "That would make me an Obama fan."
The Lone Ranger was ambushed and captured by an Indian war party. The Indian chief proclaims, "So you are the great Lone Ranger. In honor of the harvest festival you will be executed in 3 days. Before you are sacrificed, I will grant you 3 requests. What is your first request?" The Lone Ranger responds, "I'd like to speak to my horse." The chief nods, and Silver is brought to the Lone Ranger, who whispers in Silver's ear, and the horse gallops off. Later that evening Silver returns with a beautiful blonde on his back. As the chief watches, she enters the tent with the Lone Ranger, and spends the night. The next morning the Indian chief admits he's impressed. "You have a fine and loyal horse, but you will still be sacrificed in 2 days. What is your second request?" The Lone Ranger again asks to speak to his horse. Silver is brought to the Lone Ranger, and he again whispers in the horse's ear. As before, the horse gallops off and disappears over the horizon. Later that evening, to the chief's surprise, Silver returns, this time with a voluptuous brunette, more attractive than the blonde. She enters the Lone Ranger's tent and spends the night. The following morning the chief is again impressed. "You are indeed a man of many talents, but you will still be sacrificed tomorrow. What is your last request?" The Lone Ranger responds, "I'd like to speak to my horse alone." The chief is curious, but he agrees, and Silver is brought to the Lone Ranger's tent. When they are alone, the Lone Ranger grabs Silver by both ears and says, "Listen carefully, for the last time I said bring posse."
Bob was in trouble. He forgot his wedding anniversary. His wife was really pissed. She told him, "Tomorrow morning, I expect to find a gift in the driveway that goes from 0 to 200 in 6 seconds and it better be there." The next morning he got up early and left for work. When his wife woke up, she looked out the window and sure enough there was a box gift wrapped in the middle of the driveway. Confused, the wife put on her robe and ran out to the driveway, brought the box back in the house. She opened it and found a brand new bathroom scale. Bob has been missing since Friday.
A man goes to see the rabbi. "Rabbi, something terrible is happening, and I have to talk to you about it." The rabbi asked, "What's wrong?" The man replied, "My wife is poisoning me." The rabbi, very surprised by this, asks, "How can that be?" The man then pleads, "I'm telling you, I'm certain she's poisoning me. What should I do?" The rabbi then offers, "Tell you what. Let me talk to her. I'll see what I can find out, and I'll let you know." A week later the rabbi calls the man and says, "Well, I spoke to your wife. I spoke to her on the phone for 3 hours. You want my advice?" The man said yes, and the rabbi replied, "Take the poison."
Two rednecks decided that they weren't going anywhere in life and thought they should go to college to get ahead. The first went in to see the counselor, who told him to take math, history, and logic. "What's logic?" the first redneck asked. The professor answered, "Let me give you an example. Do you own a weed eater?" "I sure do." "Then I can assume, using logic, that you have a yard," replied the professor. "That's real good," said the redneck. The professor continued, "Logic will also tell me that, since you have a yard, you also own a house." Impressed, the redneck said, "Amazing. And since you own a house, logic dictates that you have a wife. That's Betty May. This is incredible." The redneck was catching on. "Finally, since you have a wife, logically I can assume that you are heterosexual," said the professor. "You're absolutely right. Why, that's the most fascinating thing I ever heard. I can't wait to take that logic class." The redneck, proud of the new world opening up to him, walked back into the hallway where his friend was still waiting. "So what classes are you taking?" asked the friend. "Math, history, and logic," replied the first redneck. "What in tarnation is logic?" asked his friend. "Let me give you an example. "Do you own a weed eater?" asked the first redneck. "No," his friend replied. "You're a queer, ain't you?"